We spend most of our lives surrounded by noise, but how much of it do we actually hear? The elevator conversation that stops the second you step in. The muffled argument through the apartment wall. The phone call someone's having in the hallway while you walk by with headphones in. These aren't just background static, they're fragments of real lives, real decisions, real moments of wait. But we've trained ourselves to tune them out. To respect privacy, sure, but also because listening requires something we're not used to giving, sustained attention to something that isn't ours. Here rests the uncomfortable truth. Most of us have overheard something important and let it dissolve into nothing. A repeated phrase that could have been a cry for help. A pattern of late-night calls that signaled a crisis. A tone of voice that carried more weight than the words themselves. We heard it, but we didn't listen. And the difference between those two things, hearing versus listening, is the difference between passive existence and active witnessing. One is easy. The other requires you to care about things that don't directly affect you. This channel is built on a belief that'll sound strange at first. The most meaningful moments don't ask for your attention, they reward it. The people having the real conversations, making the real decisions, carrying the real weight, they're not doing it on stage. They're doing it at 11:47 p.m. in an empty office building, behind a closed door, and voices low enough that you have to stop what you're doing to hear them. And most people don't stop. Most people walk right past. So here's the story. A night janitor named Marcus Cole, working the graveyard shift in a mid-tier corporate tower, who started hearing the same two voices through a wall. Same time every night, same careful tone. For 13 nights he listened. He took notes. He tracked a pattern no one asked him to track. And on the 14th night, when the voices stopped, he had to decide, was this pattern worth understanding? Or should he have just kept vacuuming and moved on? If you're ready to find out what those 13 nights were building toward and what the silence on night 14 revealed, let us begin. The wall was thin, not paper thin, but close enough that Marcus could hear the low murmur of voices from the office on the other side while he emptied the trash bins and vacuumed the carpet. It was always the same two voices, a man and a woman, talking in that careful, measured tone people use when they're discussing something that matters. He heard it first on a Monday night at 11:47 p.m. during his usual cleaning route through the third floor of the Whitman and Associates building. The conversation lasted exactly 11 minutes. Then silence. The next night, Tuesday, same time, same voices, same 11 minutes. By the third night, Marcus started paying attention. By the 13th night, he'd filled half a pocket notebook with notes. And on the 14th night, when he pressed his ear to the wall at 11:47 p.m., there was nothing. Just the hum of the HVAC and the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. What do you do when a pattern you've been tracking quietly, privately, almost obsessively just stops? When the thing that gave your repetitive work a sense of mystery suddenly goes silent, and you're left with questions no one asked you to answer. Marcus stood there in the empty hallway, mop handle in one hand, notebook in the other, and realized he'd been waiting for this conversation every night like it was appointment television, and now it was gone. Here's the question that settled into his chest that night, heavier than the cleaning cart he pushed. How much of what we overhear do we actually hear? And when the voices stop, what does the silence tell us about the lives happening just on the other side of the wall? Marcus Cole had been a night janitor for the Whitman and Associates corporate tower for 6 years. He was 41, wore steel-toed work boots that squeaked faintly on polished floors, and kept his earbuds in one pocket but rarely used them. He preferred the building's natural sounds, the settle of the air conditioning, the distant ping of the elevator, the specific creak of the third-floor conference room door. The building at night was a different place than it was during the day. Empty, honest, the fluorescent lights revealed every scuff mark, every coffee stain, every piece of evidence that people had been there. Marcus's job was to erase that evidence, to reset the building so it could pretend to be new again every morning at 8 a.m. Why did he listen so carefully? It wasn't voyeurism. It was more like bearing witness. The daytime employees, the consultants, the project managers, the executives moved through the building like it was a stage set, performing their roles. But at night, the building exhaled. Conversations that would never happen in daylight happened in the corners of offices after hours, arguments, confessions, phone calls to people who were supposed to matter. Marcus didn't judge. He just cleaned around the edges of other people's lives, and sometimes he listened. Not because he was supposed to, but because someone should. These moments existed whether or not anyone paid attention. He just happened to be the one who was there. His route was a ritual he could walk blindfolded. 10 p.m., lobby and restrooms. 10:45 p.m., second floor cubicles and break room. 11:30 p.m., third floor, starting with the corner offices and working inward. It was during this third floor stretch around 11:47 p.m. that he first heard them. Office 314. The door was closed, but the voices carried through the wall into the hallway. A man's voice, calm and specific, laying out what sounded like options. A woman's voice, quieter asking clarifying questions. Marcus paused his vacuum. The conversation was about something real, not work gossip, not small talk. Something with weight. The first night, Marcus almost ignored it. Voices behind closed doors weren't unusual. People worked late, held private meetings, made personal calls they didn't want overheard in the daytime chaos. But something about the tone made him stop. The man was saying, "If we move forward with this, there's no reversing it. You understand that, right?" The woman responded, "I understand. I've thought about it for weeks." There was a pause. Then the man again, "Okay, then we'll start the process on Thursday." Marcus stood there, one hand on the vacuum handle, listening to the silence that followed. After a beat, the voices started again, but quieter now, discussing details he couldn't make out. 11 minutes later, the sound of chairs moving. Footsteps. The office went quiet. His first reaction was curiosity mixed with caution. He didn't knock. He didn't peek through the door. He finished vacuuming the hallway, emptied the trash bin outside 314, and moved on to the next section. But the conversation stuck with him. It had the rhythm of something planned, something ritualized. And the next night, when he reached the third floor at 11:45 p.m., he slowed his approach to office 314. At exactly 11:47, the voices started again. Same man, same woman. Different words, but the same careful tone. This time, he caught a phrase. "We'll need to be precise about the timing." And another. "No one else can know until it's done." Marcus felt a prickle of something, not fear, but awareness. He was overhearing something intentional, something with stakes. On the third night, Marcus made a decision. He pulled a small spiral notebook from his cart, the one he used to jot down maintenance issues, and flipped to a blank page. He wrote, "Night 3, 11:47 p.m., office 314. Same voices. Topic: timing, secrecy, process. Duration: approximately 11 minutes. It felt strange to document something that wasn't his business, but it also felt necessary. If this was a pattern, he wanted to know. And if it wasn't, if it stopped after a few nights, then he'd have wasted a few pages of paper and nothing more. But it didn't stop. Night 4, same time. Night 5, same time. By night 7, Marcus was arriving at the third floor earlier, positioning himself near 314, pretending to organize his cleaning supplies while he waited for 11:47 p.m. to arrive. By night 9, Marcus had filled 3 pages of notes. The conversations followed a structure. The man always spoke first, framing the discussion. The woman responded with questions, specific technical questions. Then they'd work through details together, like two people building something piece by piece. On night 6, he caught the phrase, "If we're doing this, we need to be aligned on every variable." On night 8, "Once we commit, we can't show hesitation." The words themselves were vague, but the emotional undertone was clear. Whatever they were planning required precision, secrecy, and mutual trust. It wasn't an affair. The tone was too formal, too task-oriented. It was collaboration on something high-risk. The pattern had another layer. Consistency of time and duration. 11:47 p.m. every night, almost to the second. 11 to 13 minutes of conversation, then silence. Marcus started testing variables. On night 10, he vacuumed louder than usual outside the door. The conversation continued, undisturbed. On night 11, he arrived at 11:35 and waited in the hallway. At 11:47, right on cue, the voices began. They weren't reacting to his presence. They didn't know he was listening. This wasn't performance. It was routine. A private nightly ritual that happened regardless of who else was in the building. On night 12, Marcus heard something new. The woman's voice carried a note of finality. "So we're agreed. After tomorrow night, we go quiet for 2 weeks. No contact. No changes. We let it settle." The man responded, "Agreed. 13 nights is enough." "We've covered everything." Marcus's pulse quickened. 13 nights. Tomorrow would be night 13. The last one. He wrote it down, underlining it twice. The next night, night 13, he positioned himself as close to the door as he dared, pretending to wipe down the baseboards. The conversation happened exactly as it had before, but with a new weight. The man said, "This is it. After tonight, we don't speak about this again until it's done." The woman said, "Understood. Thank you for trusting me." And then, for the first time, Marcus heard the scrape of chairs, the click of the door unlocking from the inside, and the sound of 2 sets of footsteps leaving the office and heading toward the elevator. He ducked into a side hallway, heart pounding, and watched 2 silhouettes disappear into the elevator car. He didn't see their faces. Night 14. Marcus arrived at the 3rd floor at 11:30 p.m., 30 minutes early, his notebook open to a fresh page. He positioned his cart near office 314 and busied himself wiping down windowsills, organizing supplies, doing anything that justified his presence in the hallway. 11:40, 11:45, 11:47. Nothing. No voices. No movement. The office was dark, the door locked, the air still. He stood there for 15 minutes just listening. The HVAC hummed. A distant car alarm chirped in the parking lot below. But no conversation, The pattern had broken. At first, Marcus felt a strange sense of loss, like he'd been following a serialized story and the final episode had been canceled without explanation. But loss gave way to something else: concern. Why had they stopped? Had the process they'd been planning started? Was it finished? Or had something gone wrong? He thought about the tone of their voices, calm, methodical, but carrying an undercurrent of stakes. What had they been aligning on? What required 13 nights of precise discussion and then total silence? He realized he'd been so focused on the pattern that he hadn't tried to understand the people. Who were they? Why Office 314? Why 11:47 p.m.? Marcus spent the next few nights investigating in small, unobtrusive ways. He checked the nameplate outside Office 314, J. Whitman, senior partner. He cross-referenced the building as after-hours access logs. Only 2 people had keycard swipes for the 3rd floor after 10 p.m. on the nights he'd heard the conversations. One was tagged to J. Whitman, the other to an M. Lindquist, associate consultant. He Googled them. Whitman, 56, corporate restructuring expert. Lindquist, 34, HR compliance consultant. On paper, they worked in adjacent fields, but nothing indicated why they'd need 13 secret late-night meetings. Marcus also noticed something he'd missed before. Office 314 had a second door, a private interior door that connected to an adjacent conference room. That's how they'd been leaving without him seeing them every night. The answer came 3 weeks later, not from Marcus's investigation, but from a memo taped to the employee bulletin board in the lobby. He saw it at the start of his shift while unlocking the janitorial supply closet. The memo, dated 2 weeks prior, announced a major internal restructuring of Whitman and Associates, effective immediately. Several senior positions had been eliminated. A new equity partnership structure had been established, offering junior consultants paths to ownership. The transition, the memo noted, had been planned meticulously over several months to ensure fairness and minimal disruption. It was signed by J. Whitman and M. Lindquist, listed as co-facilitators of the Restructuring Committee. Marcus read it twice, then pulled out his notebook and flipped back through his notes. 13 nights of conversation. Alignment on every variable. Secrecy until it was done. Precision about timing. It clicked. They hadn't been planning something underhanded. They'd been planning something huge and incredibly delicate. A restructuring that would cost some people their jobs and give others unexpected opportunities. It required absolute confidentiality. If word leaked early, it could have caused panic, resignations, or legal challenges. 13 nights to map every detail, anticipate every reaction, align on every decision. And then 2 weeks of silence while the plan rolled out. The conversations hadn't been secretive because they were unethical. They'd been secretive because they were responsible. Marcus felt something unexpected: respect. These two people had carried the weight of decisions that would change dozens of lives, and they'd done it quietly, carefully, without fanfare. No one knew about the 13 nights except him, and in a strange way, that felt right. Not every significant moment needs an audience. Some of the most important work happens in the margins, in the late hours, behind closed doors, between two people who trust each other enough to do the hard thing the right way. Marcus closed his notebook and slipped it back into his cart. He didn't need to write anything else. The pattern was complete. So what's the lesson hidden in the silence of night 14? It's this: the world is full of conversations we overhear but don't truly listen to. Voices through walls, phone calls in hallways, whispered debates in corners. Most of the time, we tune them out as background noise. But every now and then, if you pay attention, if you notice the rhythm, the repetition, the care in someone's tone, you realize you're witnessing something significant. Not dramatic. Not scandalous. Just significant. The quiet work of people trying to do something difficult with integrity. Marcus never spoke to Jay Whitman or M. Lindquist. He never told anyone about the 13 nights. But the experience changed the way he moved through the building. He started listening differently, not to spy, but to witness. To acknowledge that the lives happening around him, even in fragments and through walls, mattered. That the patterns people create, intentional or accidental, are a form of communication. Even if they don't know anyone's receiving it, the building wasn't just a place he cleaned. It was a place where things happened, where decisions were made, where two people could meet for 13 nights and change the course of a company without anyone noticing. Here's the question for you. What conversations are happening just outside your awareness? What patterns are forming in the margins of your daily routine voices you hear but don't listen to? Rhythms you notice but don't track, silences that mean something if you're paying attention? And if you did listen, truly listen, what would you learn about the lives unfolding quietly around you? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious what you've been overhearing. Let's step back and look at what Marcus actually witnessed. This wasn't espionage. It wasn't scandal. It was two professionals spending 13 late nights carefully, methodically planning a corporate restructuring that would affect dozens of lives. They did it in secret, not because they were hiding something unethical, but because premature exposure could have caused panic, legal complications, or mass resignations. The pattern Marcus tracked the precision of time, the consistency of tone. The deliberate endpoint was the signature of people doing hard work the right way. Work that required trust, alignment, and the discipline to stay quiet until the plan was ready. The silence on night 14 wasn't an ending, it was a transition. The talking phase was over, the doing phase had begun. What does this mean for you? It means the patterns you overhear, the repeated rhythms in other people's lives, aren't just noise. They're signals. Most of the time, those signals aren't meant for you, but sometimes paying attention to them teaches you something about care, about responsibility, about how significant work actually gets done. It happens quietly. It happens in the margins. And it happens whether or not anyone's listening. Marcus didn't need to intervene. He didn't need to insert himself into their process. He just needed to witness it, to acknowledge that something important was happening, and to respect it enough not to interfere. Here are 2 exercises you can try this week. Exercise 1. The overhead conversation log for 3 days. When you overhear a conversation on a train, through a wall, in a hallway, Write down one specific phrase you caught and the tone it was delivered in. Don't try to piece together the full context. Just note the fragment. By day 3, you will start noticing how much emotional weight lives in the things people say when they think no one important is listening. Exercise 2. The pattern of voices. Pick a recurring sound or voice in your environment, a neighbor's nightly phone call, a coworker's recurring meeting time, a specific hour when your building gets quiet. Track it for 1 week. Note when it happens, how long it lasts, and whether it changes. Ask yourself, what does this pattern tell me about the person or people creating it? You don't need to act on the answer. You just need to notice. Now, the questions. Have you ever overheard something repeatedly and realized it was a pattern, not a coincidence? What was it? And did you ever find out what it meant? What's the difference between eavesdropping and witnessing? Where's the ethical line for you? If you discovered that something you overheard was part of a significant, private process, would you feel compelled to say something, or would you let it remain unspoken? Share your thoughts below. I read every comment, and I'm genuinely curious what patterns you've noticed in the voices around you. If stories like this, the kind that unfold slowly, reward patience, and ask you to listen differently speak to you, consider subscribing and turning on notifications. Quiet Witnesses is here to remind you that the most important conversations aren't always the loudest ones. Sometimes they're happening right on the other side of the wall,